The root of the man. The question of why a singular soul is chosen for a singular horror lodges itself deep in the marrow of our bones. When the life we have so meticulously built begins to splinter and break, we cry out to the unforgiving static for a reason, for a fairness from a cosmos that knows no such thing. But the darkness does not deal in fairness. It deals in suitability. Sometimes the reason you are chosen is because of the very thing you love the most. Your talent is not a shield. It is the key to the cage. The air in Kenji's workshop tasted of cedar, cypress, and 40 years of patience. His world was contained within these four walls, a universe defined by the clean, sharp scent of wood shavings and the sacred rhythm of his craft. Kenji was a master woodworker, a title he bore with the quiet, stoic reverence of a priest tending his altar. His hands, though calloused and mapped with a geography of old wounds, were instruments of profound sensitivity. They moved with a surgeon's grace, reading the life story of a tree in the whirls of its grain, feeling the deep, silent pulse of a plank beneath their scarred pads. He worked alone, the silence his only apprentice, a silence broken by the honest liturgy of his labor. The whisper of steel shaving timber was his prayer. The hiss of fine grit sandpaper was his hymn. His latest obsession had been torn from the Aokigahara, the dense, notorious sea of trees whispering at the foot of Mount Fuji. He had ventured farther into its sorrowful depths than ever before, the normal sounds of the forest giving way to a profound listening quiet, a pressure in the ears, a deadening of all noise save the thud of his own heart. There, he found it. A burl of zelkova wood, clinging to the trunk of a gnarled, impossibly old tree, like a cancerous growth. It was unlike any he had ever seen. The grain didn't just swirl, it writhed, twisting in on itself in patterns that were both chaotic and disturbingly organic, like a nest of sleeping serpents carved from timber. It felt wrong. It felt perfect. He spent hours cutting it free, the fine teeth of his saw groaning in protest as the air grew strangely cold. When the burl finally came away, it was with a wet tearing sound, like cartilage parting from bone. Back in his workshop, the burl sat on his workbench like a dark, coiled heart. The wood resisted his efforts with an unnatural defiance. His sharpest chisel skittered across its surface with a screech of tortured metal, leaving no mark. His rasp produced only a fine, rust-colored dust that irritated his lungs and smelled faintly of iron. Days bled into weeks. Kenji, a man of profound discipline, became a man possessed. He neglected commissions, ignored the insistent ringing of his telephone until it fell silent for good, his world shrinking to the conquest of this single, stubborn piece of wood. The first change was small, a roughness on the palm of his left hand, a patch of skin that felt strangely hard like old leather. He dismissed it as a new callus. But it spread. Soon the skin had taken on a faint, wood-like texture, the familiar lines of his palm deepening and darkening until they resembled the polished grain of oak. He stared at it under the stark workshop light, a cold knot tightening in his stomach. He tried to sand it down with his finest paper, and hissed as a shower of tiny wooden splinters flaked away from his own flesh. The soundscape of his life began to corrupt. The familiar hum of his lathe was now underscored by a low, almost subsonic thrumming that seemed to emanate not from his tools, but from the burl itself. At night he would lie awake, the silence of his small home no longer a comfort. He could hear a faint, rhythmic creaking, like the branches of a great tree straining in a high wind, but it was coming from inside his own body. He would sit bolt upright in the dark, straining to listen, the only other sound the frantic, wet pounding of his own heart. He decided he had to destroy it. He carried the burl to his furnace, the strange wood now feeling warm, almost pulsing, in his grip. But as he opened the furnace door, a wave of intense vertigo washed over him. The creaking in his bones intensified to a deafening roar, the shriek of 1,000 trees being felled at once, and his right leg buckled. He looked down and saw, to his horror, that his foot had fused to the floorboards. Tendrils of dark, living wood, his own flesh, had snaked down, merging seamlessly with the pine planks, rooting him to the spot. "Why me?" he screamed, the sound swallowed by the sudden roaring silence in his mind. The answer came as a whisper, not in his ears but in his blood, a cold, ancient thought that was not his own. "Because you took what was ours." The transformation accelerated into a storm of body horror. His skin became bark, rough and deeply fissured. His fingers elongated, stiffening into twigs that sprouted tiny, obscene green buds at their tips. He could feel his own skeleton groaning, twisting, the very marrow of him reshaping itself into the gnarled architecture of a tree. The sound of his own movement was no longer the soft shuffle of a man, but the dry rustle of dead leaves, the woody scrape of branch against branch. One morning, he coughed, and a spray of damp moss and black, loamy soil speckled the floor. His sense of smell, once attuned to the subtleties of cedar and pine, was now overwhelmed by the rich, suffocating scent of decay and wet earth. He was becoming a part of the forest he had plundered. The true horror arrived not in a moment of violence, but of silent, sickening revelation. Trapped in his own workshop, now a grotesque hybrid of man and tree, he watched as the burl on the bench began to unfurl. The serpentine grain loosened, and the wood split open with a series of wet, cracking sounds like a chrysalis bursting. It was not a burl, it was a womb. And the thing inside, a pale, root-like homunculus with Kenji's own terrified eyes, began to stir with a soft, liquid sound. He understood then. The burl hadn't been resisting him. It had been planting him. It was a seed from the ancient forest, and he, his skill, his obsession, his body, was the soil. His life's work had not made him its master. It had made him the perfect vessel. The last vestiges of his humanity cried out, a silent internal shriek that had no voice, only the sensation of sap freezing in his veins. He could feel the roots of his own being burrowing deeper into the foundation of his home, drawing sustenance, connecting him to the vast, malevolent network of the Aokigahara. He could hear the forest now, not as a sound in the air, but as a thought in the wood of his own mind, a collective, patient, and utterly indifferent consciousness. It was reclaiming its own, and he was merely the price of the theft, a karmic consequence carved not in stone, but in living, screaming wood. We ask the darkness for a reason that will make our suffering bearable. We believe our devotion, our passion, our singular talent makes us special. But in the grand, terrifying arithmetic of the cosmos, what we perceive as a gift is often just a key. A key that unlocks a door we never knew existed, a door to a place where our greatest love becomes our greatest predator. Kenji's hands understood the wood better than any man alive. And in the end, that was the only answer he would ever need.